Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Empire Media, AMPIRE. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And don't forget, you can always read my work on ESPN.com. Got a lot going on because it's a season opening week, as you know. Before I get to my guest, former Washington tight end Logan Paulsen, just a couple housekeeping items to go over. So first, Bram Weinstein, the voice of the Commanders, and I will be doing a live stream show Tuesday night, 7:30 Eastern time. So join us for that. Again, going to get you ready for the season and just talk about various things with the team, but also looking ahead a little bit to the game. So that's one thing. I'm going to have Jenna Lane, who covers the Bucs for ESPN, going to have her on later this week. And plus just some, a Wednesday practice report and all sorts of things that you guys can look forward to and hopefully tune in to. So just wanted to go over that. So you got a heads up. And today it's Logan Paulsen. And I wanted to talk to Logan just for obvious reasons. He's very smart, but also to kind of get ready for the season, just his thoughts on where this offense is at, some of the challenges for a rookie quarterback going into the first game, especially facing a Todd Bowles D, things that Jaden Daniels does well that helps offset what he might see, plus the impact of Cliff Kingsbury's play calling on the offensive line, how that can help. So we go over all that stuff. We talk about the defense too, all that good stuff. Anyways, without further ado, here's my conversation with former Washington tight end Logan Paulsen.
Hey, it's Bram Weinstein here, voice of the Commanders, and of course, frequent guest of this podcast, the John Keim Report. I wanted to let you all know that my show, which airs at 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. on ESPN 630, is now exclusively produced by Empire Media, my company, and is going to be distributed through our network. So I'm asking you, please, if you subscribe to this show and love this show, give mine a try as well. Subscribe to the Bram Weinstein Show wherever you get your podcasts, and many of the shows and many of the elements that are in the show will be available on the Empire Media YouTube channel. We're going to talk a ton of Commanders and other DC sports. Check it out.
First of all, Logan, you have to be the busiest person in the podcast world these days. Like, I think you now are part of 10 different shows and all that. So first, before we get going, you do have a couple of new things, correct? You have Take Command.
Yeah.
What else are you doing within that world?
Yeah, I've got Take Command. I've got the Command Center podcast with Fred and Santana. I've got the Command Center show. I've got Coach's Show. Now that season started, we're going to start doing our, film breakdowns and conversation discussion with Coach Dan Quinn, which is going to be super fun. And then I do the in-game radio broadcast from the sideline. So that's been a lot of fun to work with Bram and London on game day. So those are kind of my big things right now with regards to media stuff. So, but you can always add more, I guess, the John Keim podcast, just so that I know.
There you go. But I will say, what I'm happy about is that there's been this nice building for you of getting more and more and more work, because I just think it's the approach you take. I've always told you, I've told others, you're one of the smartest players I've ever covered. So I'm glad to see this, but you're not a hot take guy, which I greatly appreciate. So I just think that when you combine that approach, I think it leads to more and more work and just quality work. So anyways, but I just wanted to point that out. And for people listening, I think
Thanks,
that.
man. I appreciate it.
So anyways, so let's get to this team. And we got first game coming up later this week. And I'm just curious, so in general, as you get it to this point, we've talked a lot about what they're going to do in the draft, what they're going to do in free agency, what they're going to do, how they're going to look, et cetera. Gotten through all that. So how are you looking at them as we enter the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still a lot to be determined. I think that's something that maybe fans aren't always super clear on, is everyone thinks, after the final cuts, that's who your team is. But I think there's still going to be a lot of changes with the roster, but also schematically, I think they still got to figure out what plays. And what I mean by that is as an offensive coordinator, maybe you think we want to be in this personnel more, but we actually are more efficient in, 12 personnel or 13 personnel or 11 or whatever it is. And defensively, oh, we like this pressure package, but actually it works better out of this personnel grouping, or we like this front better, or this player that we weren't really sure about blossoms and we can utilize him more. So I do think there's going to be a lot of growing still to happen, especially because the team's kind of young, especially like from a coaching and like front office standpoint. They're still kind of figuring out what works, and that's because they're a relatively young team, but I think it's also something every team goes through, and so that'll be really interesting to watch them. But going in, I think I'm really excited about the quarterback. I want to see what he looks like. I think if that ends up working out, that's going to be a pretty dramatic win for this organization. I'm curious to see how they utilize the offensive skill position players, Terry, and then, is it Zach Ertz kind of as the two receiver, or does, Diami really take a big step, or does Ben Sinnott kind of fill a role? And then how do they use the running backs? I mean, the running backs, I think, are going to be a really special group. And how do they handle the offensive line depth? And so, like, offensively, I think those are some all kind of interesting storylines going in. And then defensively, I think the main one is just what does this defense actually look like? Because I think we've seen clips and snippets and previews of it through training camp, but I don't think we got the whole thing. So I want to see what it looks like, how he calls a game, and what they end up settling into defensively. So
I'm curious on the pressure packages, because we've seen a little bit, but and also how it mixes with coverages and disguising coverages, because that's a huge part of what they want to do. And I don't know that we've seen that. I think they, one thing I like, I know we've seen guys getting beat on the outside. Sometimes you're doing that to test what they can do. Now they got to do better, but you know what I'm saying? Like, so we don't know how it's all going to look. But let's stick on offense for right now. First of all, you brought up Zach Ertz. I thought he looked really good this summer. Now I know he's a veteran, so you would think he should look good. However, I felt like he and Jaden kind of developed a nice little thing there during practices. What did you see from him, just as far as how much he can help this team? And I know, again, like, when I'm watching the summer, like, do you look at it like, well, he's a veteran, he's going to do well here? Or do you look at it like, hey, he's showing what he still has left, if that makes sense?
I think it's definitely the latter. I think he showed kind of what he has left and what he can still do at a high level. And I think he's always been a guy who's never been like a win with like raw horsepower, like your Vernon Davises, or, insert your really explosive tight end here, Darren Waller, for example. He's never been that guy. And just to see how his game has matured from, because he's a little bit younger than me, but I got to watch like his whole career and just every year how he improved and how he changed, and then watch, kind of how he applied that skill set, like the route stems, the subtle indicators, the understanding of coverages, and just the consistency with which he's able to get open, I think is the thing that really jumped out to me. And, talk about the development of a young quarterback, like that ability to consistently be where you're supposed to be and know that you're going to win is a big deal. And I think like that's one of the things that Terry's always brought to the offense, but it's nice to have another piece that, hey, he's getting pressed, he can win versus press. Oh, it's cover three, like he knows how to take an angle out here to ensure the throw. And I think that that skill set is extremely valuable, and that consistency is extremely valuable for this offense. And, obviously I hope he stays healthy. He's been a little bit, bit by the injury bug over the last couple of years, but if he can stay healthy and play the way he played through training camp, I think there's a really good shot that he's very, very productive in this offense and really assists in Jaden Daniels' growth.
That's the key too, because it was clear in watching practices that Jaden really trusts him. And and I think they developed something nice. So, I'm going to say, how important is a guy like that, especially over the middle, to give another option to kind of widen this offense a little bit or to attack each area? How important is he to what Jaden can do?
I think it's extremely critical, especially given kind of the different coverage structures you're getting and how teams are playing to stop the big play. They play these softer, quarters, cover six, quarters match, all these different things, like kind of where you've got more deep players and less underneath coverage players. So finding players who understand how to work that underneath area of the field is extremely important. And that's not to say Zach only does that. I think he works in the seam very nicely. I think he runs a nice out. I think he runs a nice deep dig. I think all those plays, those routes are on the table for him because of some of that subtlety in route running that we just talked about. And I think, understanding Cliff's offense is also a huge help because he understands like how it's supposed to space. And like, it's so funny. One of the things, like when you're installing an offense or you're learning a new offense, it's drawn on paper in a certain way, but the player's understanding of the offense really makes it come to life. And I really think when you watch Zach run routes, you saw that this spring, as he understood how things were supposed to space out, where he should be in relation to thing. And that, again, I go back to that word consistency with him. That for a young quarterback is invaluable because, like, how many times did we see him run the deep high cross and it looks like it's covered, but he runs to space in the right way and Jaden can trust it and the ball's out early, he's throwing with anticipation. That doesn't happen with people you can't trust and aren't consistent. And Zach, I think, was able to build that trust with him because of his consistency and because of his experience with that skill set of running routes and understanding what defenses are trying to do.
Offensive line, what questions do you
Mm.
still have about that group?
I think for me, the questions aren't necessarily with the offensive line because I think we have a pretty clear understanding of who everybody is outside of Brandon Coleman. Brandon Coleman is kind of the ace in the hole. Like if he ends up hitting, it gives you some flexibility with the tackles. But I want to see how Cliff calls a game. And I think we got to see snippets of that in the preseason, and I think he did a really good job of understanding the limitations of the offensive line and understanding quick game, understanding when to take shots, screens, obviously a big part of that, understanding when to use tempo. I thought that was nice to see that as well. But essentially what all those things kind of culminate with is understand how to deleverage the offensive line. And if he can do that as a play caller, I don't think we'll even be talking about this group. Are they a top 5 group in the NFL? No. But with good play calling, they could probably crack the top 20, top 15, and that's a serviceable way to win football games. I think when you look at some of the stuff Wiley did in the preseason, I know he's banged up a little bit, but the way he moves, you can pull him, you can get him out in space on screens. I think that skill set's going to be elevated here. Cosme, obviously, excellent at that. I was really impressed with Biotish and how he moved on some of
Yeah.
the stuff. They had some different calls in terms of running outside zone, but pulling him and getting him out in space. Very Jason Kelsey-esque, obviously not the same athlete, but that ability to move around. And then, if Coleman is healthy, like he's a special mover. Watching him kind of do the warm-ups and move around and hit the bag, it's like, God, he's a special athlete. And that showed up in this combine testing. But but he's got to get healthy. And
Right.
so, there is an opportunity that this group is kind of punching above their weight class in terms of how effective they are as 5 guys working together with Cliff calling plays. But that's hard on a play caller, and I think Cliff seems to be well aware of that, and hopefully we get to see those kind of 5 starting guys out there sooner rather than later, and Cliff does a good job calling the game. So in terms of offensive line question, it's more we know what they are, we know what they can do. It's how Cliff utilizes that skill set and maximizes them as opposed to putting them in bad spots.
Right. And it's funny because I think that's such an underrated part for that group. And it was last year too, that people just looked at the group, but it's a totality of that goes into it that impacts a lot of things, including, how quick the quarterback does this, style of run plays, et cetera. So all that matters with Coleman, because I think Johnny Newton's kind of in the same boat as well. They missed a lot of good practice time in training camp. How much will that set them back? I mean, it may be even hard to tell because it could be an individual thing and that there are different positions and all that, but that's valuable time that they've missed.
Yeah, it is. It's extremely valuable. And I don't really have a great answer. It's like, my initial gut reaction is that, hey, defensive tackle is a little bit simpler to learn. It's a little bit simpler to play. So the learning curve there shouldn't be too challenging. But I've also played with guys who've had a really hard time understanding and adapting, especially really explosive pass rushing guys on the interior, understanding how the timing changes, right? Because the offensive line's a little bit quicker, they're a little bit bigger, they're a little bit stronger, they get on you a little bit quicker, they have more diverse pass sets. And so guys that you'd think would be able to transition really quickly have a hard time. Now, I think Brandon Coleman did more stuff in the offseason, did more stuff in training camp, not by a large margin, but slightly more. So I would feel a little bit more comfortable. But again, that position, offensive line, tackle specifically, is so technical now. Like these rushers, these pass rushers are getting so much more efficient. They understand pass rushing keys and tells at a high level. They have a wider array of moves. So I would think in terms of transition, I would assume Johnny Newton would have an easier time. Now that's not always the case, as I just alluded to there.
Right.
But I think Coleman is going to have a harder time because like you just need reps, and he has not been able to get a ton of reps, and that's nobody's fault. Like he, from all accounts, is working hard and trying to get back, all those types of things, but you can't replace time on task and time on the field. And so I think that's why you go out and you re-sign a guy like Cornelius Lucas, a guy who can give you 5, 6 starts if you need him, and play at a high level. So I think that's what you're looking at there. And hopefully, Coleman's one of these guys that is an anomaly and figures it out really quick. But I do think he's got a little bit of an uphill climb, not from a physical standpoint, from a mental kind of adjustment standpoint.
I remember listening to Joe Thomas several years ago talking about the science of pass protection.
Yeah.
And talking to Trent Williams about that too, and how he kind of evolved with how you have playing the angles, playing, the hands, et cetera, and trying, there's so much that goes into it other than just get in front of your guy and block him. So that's where he's going to have, and then the timing with Allegretti and all that, but it helps that Allegretti and Biadasz are veterans, and have seen a lot, and they can sit at the line and say,
Help
hey,
him.
just do that and help him,
Yeah.
right? But the
Yeah.
other part too, and I'm going to get to the defense in a minute, but this team, one of the things it seems like they have good intangibles, it feels like, right? Whether it's the chemistry, the leadership, whatever. How important is that? And what teams were you on that maybe had a high level of that, and what was the result? Because
Yeah,
I think
so
people assume there's always a winning team at the end of that, but I don't know that that's always the case.
Yeah, I think the team that comes to mind is the 2012 team with obviously when Kyle was here and Robert was here. And if you look at the skill position players on that team and the offensive line too, there wasn't really like a true stud. Like Trent was starting to figure it out and he was starting to show why he could be special, but he was still growing. And then you had guys like Corey Lichtensteiger, Will Montgomery, Chris Chester, Tyler Columbus, and that's not like a killer group by any stretch of the imagination. But they were tough, they worked well together. The skill position players were tough and gritty and smart. And again, there was great playmakers like, Pierre Garçon, all that kind of stuff. But the toughness gives you like a really good floor. The toughness, smart football player gives you a good floor because you're going to get guys that are going to compete down in and down out. And I know that sounds like such a cliche, but it's so incredibly important. And I think that's why you see teams that have flipped cultures quickly, the Detroit Lions, the San Francisco 49ers. The first thing that they work on is this mentality, this mindset, this culture. And I know people don't like that culture word as a buzzword, but they breed toughness. They bring tough, competitive people in, and you get a tough, competitive product on the field. And I think, like, obviously, this roster, I think people have talked about, is still growing in terms of total talent. But if you get the right kind of toughness floor in here, you get a team like the Arizona Cardinals last year. And the Arizona Cardinals, I know they didn't win a lot of games, but that's a good football team that's headed in the right direction. So I think I can't overstate, especially for a rebuilding or a retooling program, how important that is. And that's one thing I love about what Adam Peters has done and Dan has done is they've identified and targeted people with this roster construction that fit that mold. So I do think it sets the floor at a very specific spot that's awesome. And it gives you an opportunity to win some games you shouldn't because you've got guys that are going to play, 60 minutes of football, which is excellent.
And it's funny because when people ask me what I think they're going to do, and first of all, it's impossible to know, especially in a new thing. Those are those little things that you don't know what is the impact of this going to be. Like we can see the roster,
Right.
We can make your mind up about how good some of these players are, but there's those other little factors that can make the difference in a few games that can then make a difference in your season.
I think that's 100% right. Like it can take you from 5 wins to 8 wins. And we're not talking, they're not going to the Super Bowl, but 8 wins is a big deal in terms of confidence, in terms of year one. Like that's awesome. And then you get guys, like Mike Sanderstill or Jerzon Newton who embody this culture and they get more confidence, they get more experience and they've grown as players. And then you get another influx of free agents next year, another influx of draft picks that kind of fit that same mold. And all of a sudden you got a bunch of guys that are spitting nails and nobody wants to play you. And maybe you go from 8 to 10 wins the next year and get a run in the playoffs. Like it's a slow process, but that is the cornerstone of this thing. And that is the best cornerstone you can have, something to build around that you feel great about. So I think it's extremely important. I think it's good to see early on, like I went back and was picking out clips for a coach's show and watching some of the defensive clips earlier, like Mike Sanders still chasing down a screen and, Frankie Louvu blowing up the running back on a blitz. Like that's good to see, and that's important. And guys, receivers finishing blocks, finishing downfield, like that is it's a mindset. And it makes you a better football team. And ultimately, talent's the most important thing, but having guys that fit in that is also just extremely important.
I've seen teams that have overachieved because they have that. And that's where I think this team I think they'll max out. I'll just say that. I think
I
they'll
mean, the
max out.
Steelers every year, right?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, for
the
sure.
Pittsburgh Steelers are a perfect example of that, right? They're not like the most talented team every year, but they're competitive and they're tough and they're always in the fight. So
Nobody wants to play them. And that's where I think that they've talked about creating an identity. And I think that's where you want to start. But it's to your point. I've had this conversation with others that there have been coaches in the past who will talk about wanting a certain type of team, but they're not necessarily bringing guys in to match that. Like, we want a smart,
right.
tough team. And then you're bringing in guys like, well, he's not really that smart of a player. And, and so, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think they not only said it, but I think they identified guys that fit what they want. So that's a good start.
Totally agree.
I do want to ask about, because this is going to be his first game. And well, you were there with Robert in his first game. So
Yeah.
what was that jump like for a quarterback in his first game? What's that jump like? What do you recall about that? And I know we know what happened in the game, but what do you recall about that?
Yeah.
Maybe what changes for a young quarterback in that situation?
Yeah, I think, obviously I didn't play quarterback at any point in my career, so I can't speak to exactly what it's like, but at least observationally, like
Right.
one of the things that I remember about that is I really appreciated how Kyle handled that. Like the game plan, the simplicity of it, the ways that they were able to kind of find easy looks and regulate the defense. Because that New Orleans defense was pretty good for a long time, and that was a good defense that year also. But I think like Cliff's got a big task ahead of him of being very communicative with Jaden and being like, hey, like it's the speed's going to tick up, but how can we make this as simple and as easy as possible for you for the majority of the game? And then when we got to have those big, explosive plays, those got to have it moments, like we've insulated you enough where you feel confident and comfortable to make this play down the field. And I think you look at was it like the third play of the game where Pierre Garçon goes 88 yards for a touchdown? Like that's a simple play. That's a day 3 install for Kyle in that offense. And then it takes a special player, to kind of take that to the house. And then that takes a little bit of pressure off the young guy when you get guys elevating, Alfred Morris running hard, guys making plays for him all over the field. And then like even that wrinkle that we added of like the zone read kind of grizz waggle stuff that we had in that week, I think helped kind of quiet some of the nerves because we have something that he feels really comfortable with.
Right.
So I'd say that's the thing. And then, he's never felt this way, at least at any point in the preseason, but like, don't let the moment be too big. And I'm not worried about that with him because he just
Right.
seems like such a calm, cool guy. But I do think the coaching staff and the veteran leadership of the team can really do a good job insulating that young player and making him comfortable and ultimately making him confident.
The funny thing is, and I don't want to go down this road, I'm going to stick on Jaden, but I remember that touchdown to Pierre and hearing from coaches later saying that they had a really hard time in practice that entire week on connecting on that pass. So anyways, I just think that, and there's some stuff, but that was interesting that they scored. That was the first one. But sticking with Jaden, because you're facing Tampa Bay now. What's the challenge facing a defense, the Todd Bowles defense, in your first game, given what he likes to do defensively?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that are kind of advantageous here for Washington, and what I'd say is that they haven't shown a lot of what they want to be. Because Todd Bowles, when you watch his pressure stuff, he does a really good job, very similar like Wink Martindale, of understanding your protection rules and then bringing pressures to break them. And then he's also pretty good about not being overly consistent about the patterns that he's bringing. So it's a little bit novel each and every game, right? And they're good pressures to break your protections. And so I think it's beneficial that he has not seen the protection packages that we're going to be bringing or the Commanders are going to be bringing this year, right? So that's step one. But two, I think it's also really good that they got to work against Miami also in the preseason because, Anthony Weaver and that Baltimore defense or that tree that he comes from, they do a good job of disguising coverages. They do a good job of bringing zone pressures and confusing the quarterback. And so I thought we got to see a little taste of Jaden and how he could handle that. So I think he's had a taste of it, but I think those are some of the challenges he's going to bring. They're not always going to be super sound in the back end. They're going to leverage those guys at a high level in the back end. But those pressure packages and when they bring them and how they bring them can be very, very devastating for a young quarterback. So making sure that you're locked in on the protections, the backs are locked in on the protections, you understand your hot answers versus certain looks, because you, as much as you want to prep for everything that Todd Bowles does, he's going to have something a little bit spicy for that week. So as long as you have a good plan and a good solution for that, I think you're going to be okay. But I do think when you look at Jaden, like that's the crux of the challenge, is that they are going to heat you up in critical situations, and that's going to put a lot of stress on the young player. But he's shown that he can handle that, at least through the Miami joint practice and preseason game.
Is it as much is it as much about identifying who's coming from where, or is there something, is it the way that does he have to anticipate rolling the coverages? What is the big challenge for him in that area?
Yeah, I'd say it's kind of all of the above, like when you're identifying pressures, especially like novel pressures, because you're like, oh, like we could have 7 guys on the line of scrimmage and then they drop out, right? Or they're gonna, maybe they bring the linebackers, like, they've got 3 linebackers in the line of scrimmage, they bring 2 of them, they drop one out, and they drop a defensive end out. So understanding what he's trying to accomplish, understanding what the coverage structure tells you. I think that's another one. Like in the preseason, he was pretty solid on everything, but he had that where he has to throw away to Terry. Like seeing that rock and roll of the safeties, understanding that they're not going to be in man coverage in this look. Then if they're in a zone, if they're in a fire zone, they're bringing pressure, but they're in a zone shell. Like understanding that my zone answers to the right, like identifying that type of stuff is extremely important. And so, much like I said, it's an advantage for Washington not letting Todd Bowles know what you're doing. It's also challenging because Washington doesn't have a lot of film. They have film from last year, and they have like they could anticipate what he's going to do, but like playing in the game and understanding, okay, like this is where the safety is, this is where the rotation is. They can't blitz from this direction, or this guy's going to drop out. It's extremely important, and it's really, really hard. And that's why a quarterback gets paid a lot of money, because that is very, very challenging to make split-second decisions, understand pre-snap look, understand post-snap look, and then where the ball needs to go quickly and efficiently. And so I definitely don't envy him, but I do think, hopefully Cliff comes up with a good plan. And again, he's shown an ability to kind of figure this stuff out, but it's not going to look, I think that's the main thing here, is it's going to elevate from what you saw in the preseason. It's going to be a little bit more complicated, a little bit faster, a little bit more nuanced. And can you handle that? And it's going to be really fun to watch.
And then along with that, how important is Tyler Biadasz to that, having a veteran center like him here for that?
I think it's extremely important, because could you imagine if I said, hey, you got to call the play in the huddle, you got to identify this pre and post snap look, you got to understand where your read is and identify the protections. It's just nice to have someone in there that's been in the fight before. And I don't know exactly how, like what the allocation of responsibility is from a protection standpoint, but having someone in there and a relatively experienced interior to basically be like, hey man, let's go Ron here. Let's take this to the right. Let's slide to the right. The back's got this guy. I don't think it's extremely, because it just takes something off of his plate. Right. Also, I think some of the tempo stuff Cliff does will be really helpful with that too. Just don't let them get into these complicated calls, right? Move the football. Let's move it quickly. Let's not let them get set. And again, that presents simpler pictures. So the center's important. The play caller's important. Again, all of these things are important. And then the receivers are important too. Are you hot? Are you looking for the football? Are you the hot solution in versus this pressure? Because if for whatever reason I look to throw to you and you're not ready, that's going to affect me as a young play caller in terms of as a young pass thrower, in terms of my confidence in this offense. So lots of things can be done to help him, but I think Tyler Biadasz is extremely important and valuable, definitely for this first game especially.
Last thing then on the defense, what are you expecting? We talked about a little bit about, some of the stuff earlier, but what are you expecting from them this year? What kind of, they're not going to be worse, because you can't be worse than last year. I guess you could, but I do not anticipate that. I think they made enough changes, but what are you looking to see? What are you still concerned about?
Yeah, I think anytime you got a new offense and a new defense, and I know we're talking about the defense in this example, there is there's a learning curve, right? In terms of, like we talked about at the top of the show, in terms of what you think you can do and what you can do and how you execute it. Because there's little details to every single pressure, right? Every single coverage that Like every alignment's important, and guys are still learning and working through some of that stuff. So I expect there to be some growing pains, but I do expect the group to play more physically and faster than they have the last couple of years. I do expect there to be more nuance from a rush standpoint, even if they're just rushing four. I don't think it's just going to be a straight four-man rush. I think they're going to find ways to work games, your ETs, your TEs, your TTs, all those types of things, just to maximize your rushers. And if you can maximize the rush and even bring some pressure, some exotic pressure, some complicated stuff, it helps the back end out. And so if you can do that, and that's my expectation. I think Joe Witt Jr. is a really smart guy. I think Dan Quinn's a smart guy. I think they understand the limitations of the roster, and I think they understand what they need to maximize. They need to pressure the quarterback. And so if they can get that done, get teams in second and long, third and long, and really let that front just off the leash and go, let Duran and John really hunt as pass rushers, I think there's an opportunity for them to be pretty effective. But they have to kind of, I think it's going to be slow initially until they find out what they're really, really good at, until they really own the defense. But I do think I have a lot of faith in this coaching staff. So my expectation is maybe a little bit rocky, some missed assignments here and there, but I think you're going to see a much more complicated front in terms of pressure, and I think you're going to see a much more confident back end in terms of rules, which is always a good thing for defensive success.
If you play with confidence, you can play faster, and it's never about 40 time. It's always about how you process and your confidence in what you're seeing and how you react. So anyways, that would be a thing. So I definitely think there will be better. I like the communication overall. I think it was way better this summer than any time we've heard it in the last several years. So I think that's a big improvement too. So anyways, Logan, appreciate you joining me as always. Great information. I always learn stuff. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on, John. It's always a pleasure talking with you.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Logan for joining me, and thank you as always for tuning in. We'll be back Tuesday night with Bram Weinstein, the voice of the Commanders, doing a live stream show again, 7:30 Eastern time. So join us there. Bring your questions, bring your comments. Always enjoy it. Talk to you then.